Yes.
Great, thank you.
Vice Chair Berkowitz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I just wanted to, I didn't know if you were running the meeting today or not, but if you are, we are good to go and live streaming.
You scared Supervisor Berkowitz off.
I was just going to say, we lost him. He fell. He's not on my list. Hopefully he'll come back.
Supervisor Howard's here, so that's good.
Oh, he is. Okay, there he is. Supervisor Howard, we are broadcasting. We are good to go, but, and Berkowitz and Vice Chair Berkowitz is logged back on.
Yeah, Supervisor Short will be here momentarily. We just had to jump from another meeting. And Rachel, I don't have an agenda in front of me. I'm not sure if you could put that up on the screen.
The agenda?
Or Kylie, could you share that, please?
Chair, I will email you a copy right now.
I don't have another screen to look at it from, Kylie. I'm kind of
Okay.
That's why
I can, if you want to just ask me, I can go step by step on what's listed if you want.
Let's do that if you can, please. Thank you. And let's get this thing kicked off. It is 4 o'clock.
Okay, so the first item we have is a moment of reflection.
Okay, very good. Please join me in a moment of reflection. Thank you. Kylie, you have roll on there too, I'm assuming?
Yes. Supervisor Hemmingson,
I'm here.
Supervisor Starkey,
I'm here.
Supervisor Short,
Here.
Supervisor Berkowitz. Looks like we lost him again. Chair Howard.
Present. All right, thanks, Kylie. Does somebody have a flag they could put up on the screen for us, please? There we go. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, Kylie.
We have public comment.
Okay, very good. Go ahead and read that for getting folks started.
I don't have any written public comment, Chair, and I, at the moment, am not seeing any hands raised online. I don't know if you want to give it a few more seconds.
Yes.
Chair, I'm not seeing any at this time.
Okay, very good. Then let's step right into the agenda.
We have item number 4, and it says discuss, provide direction as appropriate, and approve the proposed uses of the American Rescue Plan local funding allocations from Thorn Run Partners. So Greg,
Okay. Hey, good day, Mr. Burns. How are you today?
I'm well. How is everyone? Good to see you all, and thanks for your time. Since we want to just get right to it, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're just going to have a PowerPoint on it, and we'll walk through it.
Wonderful.
And hopefully this works better than it did a month ago.
It's just taking some time to come up, but we can see a black screen.
Let me know when you see the actual.
You're good.
All right, perfect.
Ready for you.
So as you all are aware, today we are here to talk about how the county may continue to implement its funding provided by Congress and the federal government via the American Rescue Plan. So specifically, this is related to what's known as the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds implementation. Today, we're going to talk briefly about, just with a quick recap of what the ARP local funding is. We're also going to offer you some ideas on potential uses based on not only the feedback that we received at the last meeting that we had back in July before the board, but also from staff. And then we'll talk briefly about sort of next steps, and then happy to talk further and get guidance from you. I think one of the key points of this conversation is to really dig down into the details of how you all will spend these funds in the short term, and then also over the next several years to help guide staff's effort. So within the state and local fiscal recovery fund, as you will recall, the county will receive $5.4 million over 2 years. So you've already received half of that money. It is meant to cover a period only between March 3rd of this year through the end of December 2024. Now you can expend funds beyond that, or work can be completed beyond that 2024 date. But the point is it's meant to cover those periods. Remember that we did meet on July 19th. That was a public meeting, also a special session where we went over in a lot of detail all the different allowable uses. And I'm just going to remind you very briefly what those generally are. Number one, you can support the so-called public health response. Number two, you can address negative economic impacts within the community. 3, if you have verifiable public sector revenue loss based on the Department of Treasury's sort of strict formula, you could replace those funds. You also are allowed to use some of the funding if you would like to provide premium pay. And last but not least, the Congress was very specific in mandating that if you were to use the funding for infrastructure, it could only be for water, sewer, and broadband. So now we get to the bulk of the conversation, and this is where we're really going to be looking to the board for direction. So based on the feedback that you all provided to staff and myself and my team at your July 19th meeting, and also based on the feedback that we received from county staff, we've come up with some initial suggestions for ways that you can spend the funds, all of which I want to be clear are allowable uses. So we're not entertaining at the moment any uses of funds or suggesting any uses of funds that would be sort of contrary to either federal law or congressional intent or Department of Treasury rules and regulations. Number one of the things that we did talk about during our last meeting on July 19th was that the board felt it was a worthwhile use of funding to cover a percentage of payroll costs of public safety employees due to the pandemic. So very specifically, there's a certain amount of, if you assume hypothetically that each public safety officer, for instance, or member of the sheriff's office is spending roughly a quarter of their time in one way or another dealing with the COVID pandemic between March of this year and let's say the end of this year, if not longer, then it is a justifiable use to say that that percentage of costs can be or that you can use your local ARP funding in order to offset those costs. This will have the added benefit then of allowing the county to basically retain local funds that you can then use a little bit more freely than some of the ARP funds, because you're essentially offsetting costs. So again, that's an allowable use. And that is one of the items that I believe you all at your July 19th meeting indicated was a worthwhile expenditure. Another situation that's come up lately, as you all are well aware, are the increased jail and juvenile hall medical costs. I believe that your contracts there have gotten significantly more expensive. And while not all of that increase might be specifically due to COVID, this is an allowable use of funds. So you can help offset some of the costs that you all have to incur for those medical expenses and use your ARP funds for those. We've also heard from county staff that it would be valuable to purchase a generator to help support your county sewer system, also known as the CSA. And there's also talk of doing a feasibility study for the CSA to determine, I believe it's related to your rate levels and whatnot. So those are two ideas, both focused on infrastructure that we talked about, but done in a way that those expenses are allowable. I think we've all seen also over the past 6 to 8 weeks how this pandemic is probably going to ebb and flow quite a bit over the next period of time, well into the future, I suppose. The Delta variant, I think, has caught all of us regular people a bit off guard. I know you all are feeling it pretty significantly in Del Norte County. And I think it makes sense to suggest that the board could decide to set aside some level of funding sort of to keep for later use in case you have increased costs for whatever they may be due to whether it's Delta or other variants that could come in the future. I think it's important to note also that we really don't know what kind of future federal funding or state funding may come to help the county deal with these iterations of the pandemic in the future, should they occur. And so I think it's probably prudent for you all to think about, again, setting aside a small portion of funding or some portion of funding to make sure that you're prepared in case you do have another, well, you're in the middle of an outbreak now, I understand, but certainly there could be others in the future.
So, but we still can't use that past 2024. So you're just talking about holding it until that date, Greg?
Well, not necessarily till 2024 even. I mean, it could be that you would need the funds in 2023 or some period before then, who knows?
But you're not talking about socking away for after that date. We need to expend those funds, correct?
That's correct. Yes. And last but not least, one of the issues or one of the things that you could do is certainly use a very small portion of the funds to pay for services related to ARP administration. It makes sense for you all to use a small portion of your funds to just take care of those expenses as well, I would think. I don't know what kind of public comment we might get after this presentation, or whether others in the community may try to come to you in the future as a board and ask for some of these funds. I think the county administrator has received some initial interest from a few nonprofits in the community to also have some of this funding directed to them. Most likely that would also be an allowable use. So there is the potential that you all could set aside some level of funding for nonprofit interests to help support the community response. But you don't have to, and thus far we haven't had, in my opinion, any really formal requests for those funds thus far, really concrete requests, I would say. So I think this is where we're hoping to get some feedback from the board, both myself, county administrator, and other county staff, so that we can see if we're headed in the right direction. You'll note that we didn't include dollar figures with these ideas, and that was intentional. Sorry, that's not for me, right? Okay, so we didn't set aside dollar figures or put dollar figures because some of this is a little unknown. And so I think, for instance, with respect to your percentage of payroll costs for public safety employees, that number really can shift based on sort of how the county believes the level of effort that's being undertaken by county or by public safety employees, for instance, due to the pandemic. So that number can shift a little bit. I think you have a relatively fixed cost probably for your jail and juvenile hall medical costs. So that's a little bit easier to name. I'm not sure that we have a hard number yet on the generator project or the feasibility study, but again, we have some ballpark figures. I think what we wanted to do was offer flexibility moving forward to staff, that if you all were able to agree on a couple of these items or all of them, for instance, that staff would have some level of flexibility to sort of utilize the funding in ways that you've described, but with some flexibility.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. That was a good presentation. It kind of gets the juices flowing, and more importantly, kind of urges a process for the board to consider that would essentially help to offset some of our current costs. And I think two of the items that we have in here with payroll, both the first bullet point and the last bullet point, would definitely be one of those areas that would really help to offset some of the general fund obligations that we have with those two items, and then allow us some time in the future to reconsider this maybe 2-3 years down the road as capital projects begin to develop with various board inputs.
Yeah, I think that all of these things probably are going to need some funding. I think when we start putting numbers on them, I think that's when we'll want to get involved more. So, when we start putting the actual amounts, but I think they're all good ideas, everything there.
Yep.
But we're not completely ruling out other things, though, like the nonprofits that have come forward. Several have contacted me, so we're not completely ruling those out. Are we? Are we just saying that, yeah, we're going to consider these ones today and not think about the rest of it, or are those still under consideration?
We'd have to have. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to offer my perception of what might be useful. So there's a couple different ways that you could do this. Hypothetically, the board could suggest that you set aside a certain amount of funding for nonprofit interests, and then you could ask that they almost apply for those funds, and that you all and or staff, depending on how it's worked, would have an opportunity to evaluate those proposals and dole out some of that money based on their viability and sort of how they'll help. You also could, if you had 2 or 3 that you wanted to simply say, I'd like to make sure that we give X dollars to Y nonprofit right now. I mean, you could provide that kind of detail as well. So I think certainly I know that I and county administrator and other staff would love just some clarity from you all as to what you think the best approach is, but there's a couple different ways you could do that.
Okay. I just want to, like a lot of times, and this is a frustration I have, is that, yeah, we talked about on the 19th, but now this is kind of like our first go at this. And so I just, we don't get to have those discussions with the people coming forward, other than them just telling us of their interests. So, I want to make sure, because none of them are on here. And I know all of them have talked with county staff. So I just wanted to make sure that we're not somehow overlooking them, because I do feel that they are important and they played a vital role, and are still playing a vital role during this pandemic.
So I would tell you that our intention in putting this list together was not necessarily to exclude anyone. So I want to make that very clear. I think I don't believe that anyone came forward with a very clear and solid proposal to warrant inclusion at this point, but I don't think that that precludes you all from saying, we believe they're going to get there and we want to set some funding aside to help them when they do. And I think that's, that's wholly appropriate in my opinion. And again, that would be an allowable use. So it's not a question of whether it's allowable or not. You are allowed to subgrant these funds to nonprofits or community organizations to allow them to help broadly respond to the pandemic.
And now would we set up a criteria list for that? Is that something that we could do internally? Or is this, like at what point do you establish that criteria to determine what it is that they need to have in order to receive those funds?
We probably wouldn't want to do that right now at this public meeting because
No, I know. I just meant that.
Suggested, but we certainly could come up with some sort of criteria. I think if you were to go down that path, it might make sense to set aside a certain level of funding so that people have an idea of what kinds of parameters would. I mean, the reality is you don't have all the money in the world, so you can't necessarily do everything for everyone. And I don't know that necessarily you've been asked to do everything for everyone, but you do have to, there clearly on this list are some other high priority items that I think you all have indicated you'd like to also fund. So while $5.4 million sounds like a lot, it's not necessarily a ton. You could, however, just simply say right now, well, we'd like to set aside X, and X could be several $100,000, or something like that. And say, we intend to develop a process then where nonprofits can come back in some way to the county or county staff and then to the board or something. And we can help you develop that process.
Okay.
But I think if I could just jump in here, I've talked to several of these nonprofits also, and they've got a lot of things that they want to do, but I haven't seen a solid proposal yet. I haven't seen any that, they will take all the money if it's available to them. I mean, and some of them probably think they deserve all the money, but that's not really realistic. And so until you see a proposal on what they're going to do with the money, what they need the money for, I think it's really hard to look at that and for us to come up with criteria on what we think needs to happen, when I think they should probably submit proposals, and then we should look at the proposals, and then maybe we could develop some sort of criteria on where we want some of the money to go. But, just to set money aside for a just in case kind of a thing, not knowing what kind of level of funding that they're really needing, or I shouldn't say needing, they need it all, but what they're proposing. So I don't want to get the cart before the horse too much and say, okay, we're going to set aside $500,000. Let's see your proposals, because I can guarantee you all of them will come up with a $500,000 proposal.
Yeah, and I think we batted around quite a bit on this jail piece. This for me is probably our highest priority that I see. If I could take liberty to obligate funds in a manner today that directs staff, that's where I'd have the majority going right now, to potentially leverage dollars that are coming out from USDA on the Senate side, thanks to Dianne Feinstein's push. I mean, Greg, that was incredible news you shared with us on Tuesday. This might help absolutely incentivize them to take it the rest of the way with us, but there's no question in my mind that is probably our number one priority here in the county. Second to which, again, I go back to those employee-related costs that we have right here that our general fund is basically experiencing associated with COVID and offsetting those costs. So that's kind of where my head's floating right now, but I'd love to hear from Bob and Darren. Bob, I don't know if you could hear me, but your camera's pointing at your mouse and not at your face. I'm not sure if that's
Yeah, I had the IT people in today, and I think things are at my house filed up more than usual. So
okay.
I'm not sure what you're seeing, But anyhow,
Just your mouse. Yeah, just your mouse, but we can hear your voice fine. So we'll roll with that.
okay,
Thank you.
all right. Anyhow, basically, I think the juvenile hall is a priority item. From what I've seen, I mean, that place is falling apart. It really needs our help. But the other hand, I think that what we need to do is set aside as much as possible for any contingencies, because we've had our share. And I think it's important that we plan, even though we don't have a whole lot of money, but we plan for whatever contingencies are going to be arising that we don't even know about.
Anything else from the board? I can add a little bit here. As Greg had mentioned, we kind of avoided dollar amounts just to kind of get some direction from the board on the categories. And these are the things that we have talked about over the course of the past couple of months since we've had this funding. There hasn't been any direct information given to us other than kind of offsetting these costs, bringing these funds back into the county. So we have more discretion on the use of it, and it's not restricted by the allowable uses of the American Rescue Plan Act. Some of the things that, or one of the things the board has committed to is the increased cost at the jail and juvenile hall for medical costs with the contract with WellPath at Tuesday's meeting that we approved. As far as the nonprofits go, it is an allowable use like Greg had mentioned. And if there was direction from the board to set aside a certain amount per fiscal year or as a lump sum from this funding, we could develop some criteria and some basically some guidelines on how these funds could be used. If the board suggested that any one profit couldn't receive more than this amount of money, if it was $25,000 or $50,000, if we wanted to set aside funds for feasibility studies for projects that were brought forward, as Jerry mentioned, that actually had the information needed to consider these fully and actually make some good decisions on them. A lot of the proposals that have been given to me, as Supervisor Starkey mentioned, I've discussed some of this stuff with some people in the community, and they actually are here today on the meeting. I'm assuming they're going to have public comment on this item after we're done discussing it. But they lack a lot of unanswered questions. I mean, they really have a ton of things that need to be done prior to us considering these from a funding standpoint or a partnership standpoint. But it's definitely something that staff is willing to do if directed by the board.
Thanks for that, Neil. Can you give us a rough idea on the general fund impact, potentially from the payroll cost centers, both on the professional services side and public safety side?
I believe that the percentage that was run by the county auditor controller, and Clint is on this call as well, so he can step in if he feels like he needs to.
That'd be wonderful.
The 5% alone of public safety payroll costs is in excess of $300,000. The jail and juvenile hall medical increase is in the neighborhood of $800,000 to $1 million. I did get an estimated figure from Heidi Kunsel, who is the director of community development for the generator project for the CSA, which was $300,000 to $400,000. And then, of course, Greg had talked about the set aside and just actually keeping some of these funds based on the unknowns, not only with the current surge of COVID, but just going forward and not knowing what the federal and state government funding is going to look like. They provided billions of dollars this last go around. We're already hearing from some of our departments who are state and federally funded that some of those funding sources are drying up. And they've been looking more to us for covering some of the costs of things that were covered by grant funding prior to this.
That's part of what I was going to chime in and say, in my opinion, that set aside for COVID response due to Delta or other variants, I think is something that we really need to think about after reading, a few different reports from different virologists. It sounds like we can bank on more variants coming from COVID, and what that's going to bring to us in the future, who knows? And if, this is an allowable set aside, I think we should give that some serious consideration.
Did you did you say how much the set aside and then the professional services ballpark figures? Did you say that? I missed it.
No, there isn't really any ballpark for the set aside, Supervisor Stark. It will depend on what the board wants to direct us to do for the other categories. If the board thought it was made sense to offset payroll at a 20% level, it would give us an idea of what was remaining for the set aside. As you know, we received our first tranche in May of 2021, which is 2.7 million, a little over 2.7 million. And the second tranche is expected within 12 months of that payment. So we're expecting it this fiscal year as well, in April or May of 2022. And so that funding is yet to be received. So that's something that actually could be set aside, because it's not earmarked for anything now.
Okay, but the 5% for the public safety, you came in with a figure of 300,000. Is that per year or for the pandemic total to date kind of thing?
That's for the fiscal year. 5% of the current public safety payroll is $300,000. And I think it's at a little bit higher than that. Like I said, if Clint has that figure, he can chime in. If he doesn't, I think I'm pretty close. I think it was 300 to 320,000 for 5%. And we were hoping to get direction from the board on a percentage they thought made sense. As you know, our public safety officers are dealing with the most vulnerable population in our community and are easily some of the most exposed individuals to the COVID at the jail, on the streets. So it's something that definitely makes sense and is allowable under this funding.
If I may, I just want to offer a point of clarification on that as well. So the Treasury actually says that if your public safety employees spend more than 50% of their time on COVID response or COVID related things, that in fact, Treasury will just deem 100% of their costs to be eligible for funding under the ARP. What we are suggesting to you all is that 50% mark may not be reasonable for your public safety employees, but that what you can do is have some lower level. And now Neil is describing to you that 5% equals about $300,000. But I think it's very reasonable to assume that 15 or 20 or maybe even 25 or more % of their time is actually spent on COVID response. So you can, quickly see how that $300,000 becomes $600 or $900 or $1.2 million, depending on where we end up deciding, the percentage of the time is spent on COVID related response.
So all valuable suggestions. I think we've had enough discussion unless another board member wants to weigh in right now. I think I'd like to hear, Kylie, if there's anybody in our audience on Zoom here that could help with this conversation. I'm assuming there's a few of the nonprofits that Valerie and Jerry have referred to in the audience.
Yes, give me one moment.
Thank you.
Amanda, you are on.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Amanda Hickson, and I'm the Food Program Director of the Del Norte and Tribal Lands Community Food Council of the Family Resource Center of the Redwoods. And I just want to take a couple seconds to say thank you to all of you for all of your diligent service and effort and everything that you do for the community. And the second thing that I wanted to say in my public comment is to submit a formal request that the board allot a portion of the ARP funds towards a feasibility study that would look at the feasibility of the acquisition or construction or retrofitting of a structure that would serve a dual purpose. It would be a combined standalone county emergency operations center, as well as a new home for the expanded food council work. So just to clarify, this would be a building that would be a place where the EOC and our food work and storage facilities could be located together, basically feeding two birds with one seed. So I wanted to just give a little snapshot of our work as the Community Food Council to clarify why we're in such dire need for an expanded space for our operations. Our mission is to co-create a robust and resilient local food system that provides access to healthy, culturally appropriate food to all families in Del Norte and tribal lands. We've existed for a decade, but in the last 2 years, our reach, impact, effort, and programs have grown exponentially. We do work in scaling up and formalizing the local, sustainable, resilient, local and emergency food value chains and system. We play a big role in our emergency food system. We play a big role in nutrition and food security. Just in this year, since January, we've served over 5,000 people with nutritious food. Some of those are duplicates. That includes packing 85 bags a week that Del Norte Mission Possible hands out in camps and other areas throughout the community. We also have done a lot with food rescue. We've rescued and redistributed 115,000 pounds of food with partnerships with different donors throughout the community. And we just became a new food bank, and the amount of food and programs that we're trying to run out of our little tiny space has been really cramped, and we're in need to expand. And I think that this partnership would be really viable for the community and really valuable.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Amanda a question.
Absolutely, please.
Amanda, thank you for all that you guys do. What I was hoping to see was a proposal that, if you're looking for funding, not something that's going to fund a study or feasibility, but I hate to have a feasibility study and then find out we don't have enough money to do whatever the feasibility study says or doesn't say. So if there's a way that we could get to more shovel-ready stuff, it might be a little bit easier path to go. And I don't have any idea what size you're looking at or anything, but is there any way that, do you have any sites in mind or anything like that? Or are we just wanting to do a feasibility study?
Thank you. Am I still, okay, I'm still unmuted, right? Thank you, Supervisor Hemmingson. So the bigger ask that I had actually talked about a bit with a couple people was the actual building itself. I went right to the big guns and said, we need a building. And I've been in close partnership with Kimmy Scott, and we've thought that a combined building for the food work and the standalone EOC would be a great idea. And so initially I said, this would be great. We could use the ARP funds for such a building as I'm talking about. And I do have the details of what we need, what the building would be. It would be at least 5,000 square feet. It would have warehouse space so that we could have a forklift. It would have a walk-in freezer, walk-in cooler. It would have area for us to park all of our vehicles. It would have some office space. It would have a commercial certified kitchen. So I have all the details of what the building needs would be for us. A lot of the same things that a building that a standalone EOC would have would be included in this building. But there are a number of questions that make asking for funds to build such a building not viable right now, because there's so many questions. I don't know if the county has land that it owns that we could potentially put this building, or if it has a building that could be updated and retrofitted where this building could go. I am not really aware of the permits that we would need to get to build such a building. I'm not exactly sure of what the cost would be because of different requirements. And so there's a lot of questions that a feasibility study would, I think, would actually enable us to make this project shovel ready. And then we could submit it as potentially as a community funded project. I also have other ideas for grant funding that we could, in a partnership, that I could be working on securing funding for the building as well. So it wouldn't just be our organization coming to the Board of Supervisors and saying, hey, give us a couple $1 million to build this building. It would be us in partnership, also making sure that we have the funds for the building to meet all of our needs. But first we need to know all of the details that I think we could come to through a feasibility study.
And if I could, supervisors, add something to that. I spoke to Amanda about this, and the discussion was that if you remember when we did the community funded projects, one of the priority projects was a standalone EOC. Unfortunately, at that time, we didn't have enough information to make it a viable request. We didn't have the footprint, we didn't have the square footage, we didn't have the cost. And again, like Supervisor Hemmingson was saying, it wasn't a shovel-ready project. So part of our plan going forward this fiscal year is to get that study done, get that information available. So when the next round of earmarks comes along or the community funded projects, we'll have that project ready to go and submit to legislation. So when talking with Amanda, she, her idea actually fits well with an EOC as far as the food security side of things go, and having that function in the EOC or as part of the EOC. So that was part of the conversation that I had with her.
So, but I guess my question is, and excuse my ignorance if I could though, is that how do we get them shovel ready? You know what I mean? And I understand what everybody is saying, that we don't want to set aside this funding for feasibility studies. And if we earmark or we, segregate some of it out, that everybody and their brother's going to want it. But how do we help get people ready for that? This is such a valuable service to our community. So what's the steps that we can suggest to Amanda and others about when they can come to us? Because this money is allocated for these types of things, and from my understanding.
Were you asking the other board members, Supervisor Starkey?
I was asking you, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought you were asking the other board members what you guys could do to get this. It's direction from the board. If that's something that you want to see done with some of this funding, or even some of the funding that's offset, by doing a payroll offset, it frees up the funding for the board's discretion. It actually gives you more allowable uses outside of the American Rescue Plan. So it may be one of those sources of funds that you decide to use as a feasibility study. If somebody brings up a project forward that you think needs that type of effort from us and staff to partner with us.
Well, and it sounds to me like what you were saying is we were kind of doing that study already. Neil, is that right? We're working on something for the EOC and to tag this on. Is that what you were talking about?
It's one of the things that we hope to do this fiscal year, Supervisor Hemmingson. It's something that wasn't ready last year. CAO Serena was working on that with our OES manager, Kimmy Scott. It kind of has fallen off the table now because of the latest COVID surge and the response efforts that we've had to put forward. So it is something that we're trying to get done and trying to get accomplished prior to next year's community funded projects request, and something we've been talking to Greg Burns about as well.
So maybe that's something that we can, that we can actually set aside a little bit to help out with that study that we're doing already. And it sounds to me like we're already in process, basically. And so just to add this project that Amanda was talking about, it seems like we're maybe on that road, or maybe we dropped off that road and we need to get back on it.
Well, I was going to say just that, initially the idea was to seek federal funding for obviously just the EOC itself. We had never envisioned that it would be co-located with a food security operation or insecurity. I don't know, Neil, if the county staff have made a lot of progress on the idea of sort of fleshing out the EOC idea. I think, this is an allowable use, and you certainly could put aside a little bit of money. I have no idea how much money it would cost, but it's not unreasonable to suggest that it might be, between, I don't know, $20,000 and $50,000 or something, and set that aside.
Yeah, in our discussions with, like I said, the former CIO Serena, myself, and the OES manager, $50,000 is kind of an estimate that he put on that. And in looking into trying to develop that plan with staff, current staff, and the capacity we have, he suggested doing the study and actually having somebody contract somebody to do that. And it made a lot more sense.
Okay, well, it sounds like there is some interest here. So I do want to return to public comment, but like to potentially reserve the right to revisit this after public comment, as I at least see interest from at least 2 of the board members here. So let's go to the next public comment if we can, Kylie.
Lupe, you are on.
God, this is gonna go on.
You just need to unmute your mic.
Sorry, thanks. My name is Lupe Gutierrez, and I am speaking as just a regular citizen, but I do belong to the True North organization. I keep hearing the word set aside. And so that set aside dollar doesn't sound like it's defined very well from a couple of the categories. But I do want to say that I don't think any organization feels like they deserve it, but I do like the idea that you're considering some type of criteria so that they can apply for that money. But I also think in the initial presentation, you didn't specify dollar amounts there. And so perhaps in your next, there should be another bullet point, like number 6 or 7, wherever it continues, where you can just say, set aside money for nonprofit organizations, period, just like it was suggested earlier. And it doesn't have to mean any particular organization. It just, like what you had mentioned earlier, that you could come up with a process and or criteria so that people can apply, because there are a lot of good ideas out there. And as far as a feasibility study, I think when people do feasibility studies, they have to come with some type of information for themselves. I mean, a study that costs $50,000, really, that to me is an outrageous amount. And so money maybe not well spent at this point, considering everything else that's on the table. So thank you for your time. And that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, who's next, Kylie?
Chair, I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this time.
Okay, very good. So let's bring it back into this board discussion. So there, I think it would be important for us to at least give some direction to staff today with some amounts associated with these various projects. Again, I'm going to emphasize my priorities are definitely at the jail and these general fund impacts that we have with public safety as it relates to COVID in both public safety again and administration. So hoping that we could at least address those with a 15 to 20% dollar figure or 20% figure, and then maybe look to a significant amount of that going toward leveraging our jail projects.
Can I ask a point of clarification of what you just said? The jail projects, do you mean the medical, that because that's what was on the bullet point, was to put towards the medical at the jail and juvenile hall. And then we also have, jail projects. So I was just wanting some clarification of what you were saying. Do you want it to go toward like what was on the bullet point for the cost recovery for public safety and the medical at the jail?
I'm assuming those amounts offset our general fund expenditure related to those medical costs. So yes, you're correct. And thanks for the clarification for the public, but you're right. So to those medical costs, offsetting the cost to our general fund, so our general fund dollars could be invested appropriately and leveraging those dollars.
Okay. So the direction that you would be giving though is that anything that was offset, that extra savings that were from the general fund needs to go towards the jail project.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And I would agree with that. The medical costs, certainly, we do need to have some upgrades done, and hopefully the money from Senator Feinstein becomes real. And we can also use this money to supplement that or to leverage. I think leverage would be the best way to do it if we can have a project that is very competitive. So I would agree that that's where the focus should be right now. That seems to be the most critical thing on our plate as far as infrastructure projects would be the jail, and I'm in favor of focusing on that first and seeing where we're at with that.
Darren, did you have a dollar figure in mind for the coronavirus type set aside? I know that was something that you were discussing with us, so you thought about that some more?
Actually, I didn't have a dollar figure and didn't realize that was an allowable expenditure for ARP funds until this presentation. And I brought that up just because in the past couple of weeks, I'd read a few studies that, I read a few opinions from different doctors, biologists and virologists that were talking about the COVID-19 variants and their opinion that we're not anywhere close to out of this. We're going to be doing this for, a long time. So seeing that set aside was an allowed thing from the ARP. I just wanted to suggest that we think about that and think about our future costs as we had our COVID surges and we saw the overtime at the jail and at the sheriff's office just skyrocket, and we had a real hard time filling positions, getting people into work when all the quarantining and all that had to happen. So it's a significant amount of money. I think maybe it would be wise to maybe talk about matching that 5 or 10% like we're talking about today to offset the COVID costs that we currently have. I think that would be a reasonable figure to look at for a set aside.
I think we need to set our sights a little higher. I think what Greg was alluding to earlier, that allowable costs could be much higher than that, up to 25%. So, we might be wanting to look at setting aside a considerable amount of money on that end of it too, because that's just an unknown thing. I mean, this first round that we're going through is going to be pretty tough. I mean, it's going to be easy to run out of it, or run out of the money very quickly.
I can't say I would disagree with that. I value that opinion for sure.
And I don't know if Bob wants to weigh in, but I'll just say that I do agree with everything, but I still want to make sure that I'm advocating strongly for the people that kept people fed at the very beginning of this pandemic when everything was chaotic and we weren't sure what was going on. The food bank was there making sure they were handing out money, and they're such a valuable asset to our community. And so I want to make sure that I'm at least voicing my interest in making sure that we are doing something to keep them here, keep them sustainable. And so with that, I would agree to everything with the addition of
including some set aside for the nonprofits.
We
Yeah,
heard.
let me
Sorry, Bob. Go
weigh in
ahead.
here a little bit. I think the most important project that we know we need is the improvements to the jail. We've had numerous people talk about how that jail is falling apart, and it really absolutely needs the funds. Because I don't think it's going to last a whole lot longer. And the other thing is that I think we need to set aside as much as we can set aside for future contingencies. You never know what's going to happen. And one thing we know for sure, that bad things happen, and they happen when it's least expected. So I think it's important that we have as much as we can set aside, set aside.
Thanks, Bob. Can we revisit one of the items on that original slide of Greg's, which is the CDD ask for sewer infrastructure? What are you guys thinking on that? I haven't heard much discussion there. Like to at least have it on or off the table.
Is that a cost that we know? I mean, we're talking about one generator. I thought we had 4 generators. I thought we had had a funding opportunity that was that took care of all the generators. We need more.
Chair, if I may, Heidi Kunstler is online and she has her hand raised. Would you like her to speak about this?
Absolutely.
Heidi, you're on.
Just
You just
unmute.
need to unmute.
Good afternoon, supervisors. What this is asking for is to complete the project that will be funded with Prop 1 funds, which are adding fixed generators to each of our sanitary sewer lift stations. The original project that we applied for the Prop 1 funds was scaled back, and this is making up the difference, and then also some of the accounting for the additional cost. But this would allow us to be whole to do the fixed generators at each of them, which would then free up portable generators to be used elsewhere in our community under emergency situations.
What was the amount on that ask, Heidi?
We believe 300 to 400,000. We have about 815,000 now, I believe. I would have to double check, but it would be obviously no more than what we need to complete this one specific task. And I can be able to provide you possibly better information after speaking with engineering division staff at a later date, and I could email the board.
Okay.
Thank you.
And have we looked at other funding opportunities? Seems like I just saw some more funding opportunities come through for sewer and water. I could be wrong, but
I am unaware of us looking at any others, but we can also look into that as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, that being a another direct general fund impact, I would be in favor of finishing that project. That seems like an easy sell to me.
Yeah, those projects end up saving us that amount of money, in the long run. Those types of projects, so they're pretty cost effective. So I'm certainly in favor of that too. But seems like there might be other avenues out there. I don't know if there's any more NCRP money being funneled that way, or seems like there was something else out there, but I certainly could be wrong.
Supervisor, if I could just offer one comment on that. I think there's definitely money available to do this kind of project out there, at least from the federal government, some of which flows through the state. I will add that much of it's competitive, and you're not guaranteed a win, and it's you write exhaustive grant applications. So, for instance, one program I'm thinking of is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Received a tremendous amount of money recently from the administration, billions of dollars, quite frankly, and it will be available through the state Cal OES in the near future. But again, there's no guarantee that you get those funds. It could be that you spend all of these monies, the ARP monies, and then you don't get any of the HMGP, for instance, and and then the project is still necessary. So just food for thought.
So basically what we're looking for here today, the audit controller Clinton Shad and myself as the budget team, is direction for the fiscal year 21-22 budget. As you know, that's the public hearings start on September 14th at the meeting. And we have 2 weeks for public hearings to go to September 28th, where the final adopted budget will be hopefully adopted by the board. Any kind of a direction as far as a percentage payroll offset, I've heard a lot of different percentages talked about today. So anywhere from 15 to 25%. We have the CSA project that's on here that Heidi just spoke to you about. We have the jail medical that is really kind of a committed to based on the contract that was approved by the board on Tuesday. We're thinking that's in the range of $800,000 for this fiscal year. That is the known amount for this fiscal year. And I believe our controller Chad said it's 824 or 25,000. Another thing that could be considered as far as a set aside, it's not really a designated specific amount to set aside. The funding is a little over $5.4 million. We're projecting to have the rest of that this fiscal year. So it is a part of this fiscal year's budget. And so just having that amount in that fund and department basically has that set aside for allowable uses under the American Rescue Plan Act. And going more along the lines of what Supervisor Starkey was saying, if the board wants us to look in a little more into some kind of a plan or a program or a criteria for providing funding to nonprofits, I'm definitely willing to do that with Greg and with Clint and Ganeve, also from Thorn Run Partners, and try to figure out what other communities have done. I don't know what kind of dollar amount the board's looking at, whether you want to set a limit on what a nonprofit can ask for, amount of funding per fiscal year for the next 4 years, or just open up an amount from the beginning of this and base it on requests that are submitted to the board. But that's just something that could be considered going forward. And I don't know if how much you've given thought to that.
Well, I think an important part of it is if these, that's why I think it would be nice to have proposals, because then we can find out if they're scalable. Can we scale them down a little bit and still make them a viable plan? Or if they don't get X number of dollars, does it just go out the window? So if they're asking for a level of funding that we just don't have, that's going to be impossible to do. But if they're asking for a project and it can be scalable to an amount that we can fund and it can still work, I think that's a much better project. But you know, the medical part, I think, is something that we have to do. We've already committed to that. The jail project is certainly something that has to be done also. I'm certainly in favor of doing the sewer projects, and I'd like to fund the nonprofits too. They do great work, as Valerie said. They do unbelievable work for little to nothing. You know, they're always last on the list, and I truly would like to see us put something in their direction. But I want to make sure that it's something that we can do and that will help, and that it doesn't. And that we don't put a feasibility study out there and, you know, we put $50,000 out there and we say, oh, gee, there's no way we can fund that. Then we just lost the $50,000. So, you know, I'd like to see just a little more information on that part of it.
Well, and just for a little bit more information, as far as the nonprofits are concerned, when we talked about this going into this funding, it was more along the lines of program assistance, you know, $10,000 here, $20,000 here to keep some of these programs going or to enhance some of these programs. It wasn't really to build buildings. It wasn't really to build houses. More those types of projects, I think, are more along the line of being a partner in something like that with all the stakeholders in the community, considering all funding sources. You know, perhaps maybe the county could, you know, pitch in on a match to a grant that's, you know, 300,000 or 400,000 or 500,000 or, you know, 10% of that as a match or something like that. That's kind of along the lines what we were thinking when we were looking at this funding for nonprofits.
Okay, well, that's good information to have. You know, that and I'm certainly in favor of that. Keep these programs afloat. that works for me too. Because that's scalable. I mean, if they need $5,000 or $10,000, we can probably have enough set aside to do those types of things and stretch those dollars and make them go a long way.
Well, it seemed to me, at least the way Amanda had discussed this and had been potentially considered by administration here within the last year, but dropped during COVID. We know having this joint operations center and food bank type place is something that would be a really good synergy. To me, having a $25,000 to $50,000 feasibility study when we know we need something like that here, and staff has really thought about that some. To me, that's not a big stretch for us at this time. And with available resources potentially coming down here in the next year, that feasibility study would play very well on us going out and potentially helping to secure those funds if we've got that in place. So I'd love to hear a motion, if a motion were to be considered here with everything we've talked about today, that really included some dollar amount for that, for a joint feasibility for EOC and the food pantry. I absolutely see a real need for it right now.
Do we need a motion or just direction? What are you looking for here, Neil?
Yeah, basically, we're just looking for direction from the board on some of the allowable uses that were presented to you today and that were discussed during this meeting, just to help Clinton and I clarify what we need to do going forward in preparing the final budget.
Just as an aside, we're looking to an outside firm to do a feasibility study. Who would we be looking at? What kind of firms would we be looking at to do that?
We haven't gotten that far along in the process yet, Supervisor Hemmingson.
Okay, so yeah, it would be nice to know if this idea is going to be a $50,000 or a $20,000 or somewhere in between that. It would be nice to know about what that figure would be, because we don't want to think we're going into a $20,000 to $50,000 feasibility study and it's $150,000 to do it. So, that I think that would certainly sway me to a different direction if that's what we're going. And some of these feasibility studies are just getting completely out of hand, especially in our area. So anyway, it'd be nice to have a little more information on that part of it.
If I could jump in with a suggestion. To me, it seems like all the allowable uses that we outlined on the PowerPoint seem broadly agreeable amongst all members of the board. And yet that you also would like to ensure that you support nonprofits in a yet to be determined way. Neil, I don't know how much more direction you need, but it seems to me that we have a pretty clear approach with a majority of, or really with all of the board being supportive. I think one of the things that, if I could, one more thing, if I could add, one of the things that we tried to do by not putting dollar figures was leave some flexibility, because, for instance, Supervisor Berkowitz and Supervisor Short have raised concerns over, future variants. What might this pandemic look like in 6 months? And that's a really good word of caution. I think we also have talked about how the public safety payroll costs are a bit scalable. And so we can sort of go up and down depending on, what other kinds of needs emerge. So, again, Neil, I'm not sure what kind of clarification you need or specificity, but I think we have broad agreement amongst the board. And hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, what I'd just like is if we could commit to the CSA project, what it sounds like most of the board is on board with that and giving direction for that. I'd like to provide that additional funding to Heidi to complete that project. It is pretty critical. The jail medical, of course, we've already agreed to. And if I could get, just a percentage from the payroll standpoint, I've heard 15 to 25%. I don't know if you want to just set a ceiling on that as far as the 25%. public safety offset and let us work through that as a budget team with Greg and Geneve for this fiscal year.
I think I would look at the 25% and see where it leads you. I mean, if it goes higher, that's great. I don't know that I'd want to go much lower than that.
So just kind of dovetailing off of what Greg just said and having a little flexibility.
Yep.
I've just been writing down a few figures. 800,000 for the jail medical that we've already done. If we do 25%, I believe the figure was 3,000 or 300,000 for 5%. So we're at 1.5 million there. We have 400,000 for the CSA project, and then an additional 1.5 million for a set aside is what we have talked about today. That puts us at 4.2 million. So we still have another $1.5 million on top of that for any kind of flexibility that we want in the future. So it seems it just saying, echoing what Greg says, I think we're kind of all on the same page there, and it's pretty easy, I think, to put that 25% figure on there, just like Jerry was saying, and give that direction to staff for those 4 items.
It doesn't take us long to spend it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
One thing I think you want to keep in mind is that that 25%, you're talking about $1.5 million for only one fiscal year. So you don't have a lot of longevity once you get to that kind of a level. So just keep that in mind. But
That's a good point. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that is a good point, Greg. Thank you. Appreciate that. That cat-like wit of yours comes into play more often than I can possibly say.
Neil, are you good then? You got enough direction from us? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Council, could you clarify, do we need a motion on this?
No, we don't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Greg. You've been a terrific help. Thank you for the audience for weighing in today, and Neil and folks and staff for getting it to us in a timely manner. And that was a lively discussion. And Supervisor Hemmingsen's right. We could spend it very quickly.
Well, it's already spent. I mean, we just haven't put it in the spots, but it's already gone.
Okay.
We won't find it.
Not that this subject wasn't serious, but we've got another serious topic on our agenda today that I'd like to move right into. I believe, yes, Dr. Stutz is with us today. Kylie, if you could pull him up. Oh, there he is. Good afternoon,
Hi.
Dr. Stutz. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
You're-
Awesome.
Chair, just for clarification, would you like me to read the item?
Yes, please, Kylie, go for it.
It says discuss and take possible action on the local public health order for countywide mandate for facial coverings as presented by the Del Norte County Public Health Officer.
Okay, Doctor.
Yeah, so this was a decision that I took that I've been sort of developing over the last week in response to a number of people in the community contacting me and requesting that we have a masking mandate in our county. So I was in contact with a number of other health officers in Northern California, and several of them felt that masking mandates in their counties did positively impact their numbers. These are in counties that are experiencing surges or had experienced surges in the recent past. So I didn't take the decision lightly. And I would also point out that of the many questions submitted to our town hall meeting that's supposed to happen in about 45 minutes, every single comment from the community was, why don't we have a mask mandate? There wasn't a single person that has said we shouldn't have one. So kind of in response to all of that, I did develop a masking mandate for our county, which I hope will be temporary. But I also hope that it will help level off some of the surge in cases that we're seeing. So the way that it reads, and I'm just going to read it briefly to you here, the salient point is that individuals, businesses, venue operators, hosts, and others responsible for the operation of indoor public settings and outdoor crowded settings and events must require all patrons to wear face coverings for all indoor settings and outdoor crowded settings and events, regardless of their vaccination status, and that they should post clearly visible signs as such. And then it also goes on just to strongly advocate that these facilities or venues provide face coverings at no cost to their patrons, but that's just a strong recommendation. And there's some clarification with the rest of the order on the definitions and everything. And I'm just trying to engage as many people in the community as I can so that we have community support for this. Which is an issue that is obviously contentious. And so I'd like to have as many people on board as possible.
Thank you, Doctor. Yeah, I'm not sure how the board's all feeling about this. I think we're probably all scratching our heads over the last several months, but more importantly, over the last several weeks since July 27th, why the state, given this sudden rise, especially in Delaware County, didn't react before we actually had to react ourselves. I think this community is very well practiced over a year and a half of, going along with this very type of order. And we have shown, there's no question in my mind, that it was effective for the first two variants that came through our community. We managed to keep our rates very low compared to what we're now seeing. And more importantly, we managed to keep people out of the morgue, to be very blunt. That's not happening now. And I think and I believe we should be extremely supportive of allowing and advocating for all available tools in that tool chest that are allowed to you as our public health officer. And I certainly am one would like to support exactly what you're talking about. I'd love to hear from the rest of the board on this too.
I'll just tell you that I have supported the mask mandate since our numbers started to rise. I think that it's imperative for us to do something as a community, something as simple as just putting on a mask before we go into public buildings, public gatherings, that sort of thing. I am not shy about saying it. I think that we need to do it. We have currently 22 people in the hospital. Our deaths are now up to 20. We had 70 new confirmed cases today. Our healthcare system is getting hit, and they're getting hit hard. And if we as a community can do one thing, we can put a mask on our face and try our very best to slow this spread. That's where I stand.
Dr. Stutz, where's CDPH stand on this? Where, that's kind of, I think, was the big question is how come the California Department of Public Health hasn't chimed in on this or has created this ruling like they did before?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just part of a general policy of reacting more locally instead of across the state blanket orders and things like that. I mean, we have a state team here, helping us with vaccination and monoclonal antibody therapy and testing outside the hospital 12 hours a day. And we're one of the only counties that has that right now. All eyes are focused on us and some of these other counties that are having these outbreaks. And I just think they're trying to react. They're trying to let us react more locally. It's probably part of a broader approach to shifting over to sort of a system where we don't have to shut down the economy every time. We don't have to shut down the statewide economy, and that we can leave it up to the local community to decide what's best for them, which was bound to happen at some point anyway. At some point we're going to be asked to deal with these kinds of outbreaks, and where the burden is going to be put on us as a local community to do that. We just talked about it today in terms of the funding. We don't know where this funding is going to drop off and not be available anymore. For example, the SNAP nurse situation. We had a SNAP nurse coming out to several counties in Northern California, providing vaccinations and testing and things, and we don't have that anymore. It just was too expensive for most Northern California counties to continue. It just disappeared, and it wasn't that it was ineffective. It was effective. We were getting a handful of people every day vaccinated. It's just too costly for us to afford, and we can't continue it. So, I think it's just a broader strategy of putting a lot of this on the counties, like as you already mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. As I asked the question, I kind of thought about all the times that we complained that a one-size-fits-all ruling from the state is not what we want here in our rural county. And here I am asking the question, how come the state's not doing anything? So I kind of stuck my foot in my mouth there a little bit. But yes, thank you for that. And I kind of agree. A mask mandate, it's a lot easier conversation than a vaccine mandate for sure. Mask mandate is something that's pretty simple. It's obviously effective. It's controversial for sure, but it's something that, especially in these surges, I mean, Supervisor Starkey just told us the numbers just for today, 70 new cases. So it's something that we should definitely consider.
I wanted to sort of kind of touch off that real briefly before the rest of you guys chime in. I also am putting out just a general guidance to go along with the masking mandate. This guidance is just that, it's a guidance. It's not a mandate of any kind, but it also sort of goes hand in hand with the masking mandate. And it's basically just a strong recommendation that these same entities can at least consider voluntarily closing down or limiting the capacity to their facilities, especially bars and indoor dining, consider reducing their capacity to 50%. And that employers please allow their employees to work virtually from home when possible, as well as some other general standard precautions, including promoting vaccination in vulnerable populations, especially. So that guidance is going to come out alongside the mandate, but it's reiterated in there that it's just a guidance, that we're just strongly recommending these things. And I'd like the community to kind of take that and do what they want to with it. And, there have been people in the community who've already done it before we even were considering it. I mean, you all know that, the restaurants in town that have closed down, purely based on the numbers themselves. And I really congratulate them on taking that step and demonstrating that there are people in the community that are willing to do that, because I know that's not an easy thing to do. So.
Yeah, I just, I kind of run hot and cold on it. I have no problem with wearing a mask anytime anybody asks me to, going in, to a store. If it says, please wear a mask, I put my mask on. And I think what it does to the smaller businesses is kind of make us mask police a little bit. Not that I'm not in favor. I'm not trying to say that I'm not in favor of a mandate, because I think that's where we've got. It's a pretty sad thing. Had this community stepped up, I think, from the start and got vaccinated like we think we should have, I think we would be in a whole lot different situation. But I think this is what it's driven us to this, and I think this is the least we can do is wear a mask. And I know that it's going to be hard for some people to accept. Some people think that's infringing on their rights, but I think they need to look at the rights of other people. Other people have rights too. We have a right not to get infected by someone because they don't think they should have to wear a mask, so they can go around and infect somebody else. So I think you need to look at rights on both sides. You need to look at the rights of the private business owner. If he wants to protect his employees and wants to protect other customers, in making a mandate like this. I'm not a big fan of mandates, but I think this whole situation has driven us to the point where I think it's the least we can do.
Yeah, I agree with Jerry and the rest of you. It's important for us to be able to protect others and be protected by the others. And the mask is the least we can do. So yeah, I'm definitely in favor.
Well, Dr. Stutz, I think that's about as much consensus as you're going to get from us here tonight. I think it's pretty unanimous that we're supportive of these efforts, and we truly do hope it does curve what we're seeing here now in our community. And if there's, obviously, we asked this question of you on Tuesday, and I'm glad you were responsive in getting back to us today. But if there's more we could do to help you as the public health officer, please let us know immediately. And I guarantee you staff will call us back into session. No problem.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Kylie, is there any additional items on our agenda today?
There is not. I don't know if you guys need to do public comment on this item. I'm not sure. Joel could clarify if needed.
There's not really an action here, so it's not technically required, but I do see a hand up and you might as well.
Chair, would you like me to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought Joel had clarified that. No problem.
Robert, you were on. You just need to unmute your mic.
Hi, guys. I just want to let you know, I was very glad to see this on here. You know, it's been I closed for a couple months, about a year and a half. I've been operating through a window because I realized there'd be no unity in this sort of thing. And already, though, from two of you, I can see there's controversy. I haven't heard controversy. There's no controversy in masks, and I hope the doctor can clear that up. It's something that's been used for probably centuries now. And the doctor, I'm sure, wears them frequently and always has before the pandemic, depending on what he was doing that day. You know, so it's not a controversial thing. Science doesn't change by who gets voted in or politics or any of that sort of thing. There's no controversy. And that was the problem, though. All of a sudden there was a controversy over me and my family's health. And 17 of the people who come in here, I can think of 17 individuals that I did what I did for. People who had modified vehicles for their children. People who have leukemia. People who were never going to live a normal life, as it were. And all I hear from this community is 1 out of 200 ain't too bad. 1 out of 200 ain't too bad. Bullshit. Bull fucking shit. And about fucking time. I'm sorry, but sometimes that expression is necessary to express where someone's coming from. I even tell my children that word is very important in expression. Sometimes there's no other word to express yourself. But I would like the two supervisors who would like to keep this controversial to undo the controversy. There's nothing controversial about protecting somebody in public and somebody vulnerable. We're just all macho individuals. I used to think we were all for one and one for all. And I'd like to thank you for finally coming to do this. Although, let's be honest, it wasn't you. Thank you, health officer. Thank you, health officer. Thank you, health officer. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, just to clarify that, apologize for the comments there and the profanity. I have no way of cutting that off, and well, people do what people do. But just to be clear about this, guys, the board does not have this authority. The authority is solely placed on our public health officer, Dr. Stutz, and before him, Dr. Raywald. And again, this board, as clearly through consensus, agrees with these actions. And I don't think there was hesitation from any one of us. So thank you again, Dr. Stutz. And with that, I believe now, Heidi or Kylie, we could adjourn. Is that correct?
I have one more public comment. Lacey, you were on.
Good evening. I'm also probably not somebody that should be on speakerphone. but I'll try to keep my comments brief and more kind of in a question. Mask mandates, when does this end? And who's going to enforce the mask mandates? I'm not opposed to a mask mandate, but I do believe that people should have choices and movement. I have a bigger concern with our county not addressing the testing result times. We recently I was diagnosed with positive COVID test a couple weeks ago, and it took over 7 days for me to get a test back. And it took another 5 days for public health to reach out to me. I did my own contact tracing, and thank goodness I wasn't in contact with very many people. And I've had to isolate from my daughter who's special needs. And Valerie knows that I worked really hard to try to get her vaccinated as soon as possible. But as a summer school student, she was around me for 2 days. I took her and got her a test, and 7 days later, it comes back as an error. I don't see what the county has done to reduce the amount of time for the testing. It seems like there's an unnecessary delay, which makes the contact tracing really kind of ineffective. I know that there's some conversations that there's a surge and there's a lot of testing going on, but we know that the prison staff and prisoners are getting tested and their results are back for 1 to 2 days. I think our public has lost kind of a lot of trust and hypocrisy of our Board of Supervisors, who put out things like don't go to the fair or don't do this or don't do that. But meanwhile, you'll see them at the fair or have our school board members at the fair, or we'll see big promotions of the 4th of July celebration, which I believe is kind of really where this started from. We're inviting tourists still to come into our small community when we have a really small degree of separation. We all work together. We all have to work. We all have to go to school. We have to survive. We have to bank. We have to do grocery shopping. But I haven't seen anything outside of somebody saying, okay, put a mask on. We got state assistants of nurses coming, but they won't work with COVID patients. So what is actually being done to help reduce the spread of this besides saying put on a mask and social shaming people for not having a vaccine?
Kylie,
I'm not seeing any other hands raised, Chair.
thank you. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and close it out and remind folks that we'll be on again in about 30 minutes for the town hall being organized by Senator McGuire. I think many of us, including Dr. Stutz, will be speaking tonight and appealing to the community for vigilance, amongst other things. So we look forward to seeing everybody if they want to continue at 6 o'clock. Again, good night, and appreciate everybody's time today.